What are this morning's Russian papers saying about Donald Trump's determination to take over Greenland? Well, the headline in Moskovsky Komsomolets refers to him as the mad chief doctor of the asylum. Last week brought a good joke. For decades, Denmark, as part of Nato, had been expecting Russia to attack it. But the attack has come from Nato. You get the feeling that in the asylum, the head doctor too has gone mad, and everything has gone to pieces. But what can you do? He's in charge. Europe is at a total loss, and to be honest, it's a pleasure to watch this. What, should NATO countries start fighting with one of the founders of NATO? I'd watch that. This is the Russian government paper, Российская газета. Quite an extraordinary article on Greenland. I'm going to quote it at length because I think it tells us a lot about Moscow's position on this. Note the absence of criticism of Donald Trump for wanting Greenland. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This piece borders on praise. Listen to the first part. If Trump achieves the annexation of Greenland by July the 4th, 2026, when America celebrates the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, he will undoubtedly become one of the historical figures to assert the greatness of the United States. With Greenland, the United States will become the second largest country in the world after Russia, surpassing Canada in area. For Americans, that outcome will be on a par with such planetary events as the abolition of slavery by Abraham Lincoln in 1862, or the territorial conquests of the Napoleonic Wars. Everyone will quickly forget the current diplomatic contacts with the Danes on the future of Greenland as something momentary and in fact useless. But if, thanks to Trump, Greenland becomes part of America, this will be forever. For sure, the American people will not forget such an achievement. But standing in the way of the US president's historic breakthrough is the stubbornness of Copenhagen and the mock solidarity with it of a number of intransigent European capitals, including the so-called Friends of America, Britain and France. Europe does not need the American greatness that Trump is promoting. Brussels is counting on drowning the US president in the midterm congressional elections, on not letting him conclude the greatest deal of his life. The leaders of the old world who hate Trump are doing everything to get him bogged down in endless negotiations on Greenland. The way this is written, it's almost encouraging Donald Trump to go ahead and do this, to acquire Greenland, to conclude the greatest deal of his life. And it presents Denmark, Europe in general, as the villains here, standing in the way of President Trump's historic breakthrough. The writer continues, "It is dangerous for the American president to back down over Greenland. This would instantly weaken the position of the Republican Party in upcoming congressional elections, and most likely result in the White House's opponents from the Democratic Party getting majority on Capitol Hill, with all the ensuing consequences for Trump. Whereas a rapid annexation of Greenland before the midterm elections can change this political trend. If Trump achieves his goal, then the island, with a population of 57,000 people, will become the largest territorial acquisition by the United States in its history. In this case, the current American leader will have done what his predecessors in 1867 and 1946 failed to do." Again, this sense that the paper is encouraging Donald Trump to do this, to push ahead, not to back out now. And then, more criticism of Europe. It is not surprising that the countries of the old world are eager to keep Greenland for themselves, even at the risk of the collapse of NATO. In other words, the Russian government paper blaming the possible collapse of NATO on European leaders, not on Donald Trump. And the conclusion that Moscow has reached, much to its satisfaction, for Trump, the value of the NATO alliance, where the United States has always played first fiddle, is significantly lower than the geopolitical advantages that Washington will receive from annexing the island. How this happens, peacefully through a deal or with troops, for the US president, this is a question of tactics. What is happening right now with Donald Trump and Greenland is a gift for Moscow. The weakening of the transatlantic bond between the US and Europe, between Washington and its NATO colleagues, will be celebrated in the Kremlin. An attempt by America to annex Greenland, citing security concerns, not only helps Russia to justify its war on Ukraine, But also, with Greenland dominating global headlines right now, it distracts from what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Komsomolskaya Pravda declares that the US president dreams of colour revolutions in the old world, in other words, in Europe. Washington's policy will be to bring about a change of power, not in Russia or Belarus, but in Europe, relying on right-wing patriotic forces taking charge. And look at this, a very similar piece on Greenland to the one we read in the government paper. Trump wants to leave his mark on history. Let's try to understand Trump's logic. It's absolutely clear he wants to go down in the history of his country as a great leader on a par with Washington and Lincoln. But to do this, he needs to do something grandiose. And what could be more significant, more visible than increasing territory? By annexing Greenland, Donald solves several tasks in one go. First, the US becomes the second largest country on the planet in territory after Russia. Second, Greenland's mineral resources, its innumerable riches, promise trillions in profit. Finally, this is the gate to the Arctic, known as the region of the future. America's military and economic presence here will be secured. Trump's squabbles with the Europeans and his other shenanigans will be forgotten, but the star of the polar 51st state will remain on America's flag. At the end of the day, who remembers that George Washington was a major slave owner and Abraham Lincoln brutally put Indians in reservations? Their legacy is something different, and Americans revere it.